I mentioned last review that I didn't remember much from Battle Network 3 due to it being the first one I played. Well, similarly, I'm pretty hazy on 4 as well. With this one though, it was one of the last entries I picked up, and my recollection was bad enough that I couldn't even remember which version of the game I played. I thought it was Blue Moon, but looking through my cartridges reveals it was actually Red Sun. So this raises the question, why is this one just a big blank in my memories? This is probably the most hated out of all the games in the series, so the most obvious reason could be that it was so bad that I repressed the memory. Though there is also the very distinct possibility that I don't remember it because it just wasn't very memorable. Well, I want the full experience, so I've committed myself to streaming Blue and playing Red on my own, with possible multiple playthroughs so I can see everything. So here's hoping that it's neither of those options. I'm Wes, the Explosion, and I guess we'll find out one way or another since I'm doing the review. It's once again the year 200X, and the Earth is being threatened by an incoming asteroid. All of the world's top scientists are called together to come up with a solution. Net battles have been banned to decrease net crimes. The laws have been relaxed a little, so a town-wide tournament is set up to celebrate. A weird vampire Navi has made their appearance and is going around, sucking the life force from other Navis while also running an underground crime ring that distributes corrupting drugs that grant a boost to performance. Those are the three plot lines, which intersect as the game goes on, until it becomes apparent that they were the same story the whole time. What a twist. You'd think this would make the plot really complex and interesting, but no, not really. The main focus is on a set of 3 tournaments, each having 3 rounds which are semi-randomized. There's a lot more characters given the format, but because of this, you can't spend too much time with any of them. They each have a story and I guess some sort of message, but since each one should take around 20 to 30 minutes to complete, each feels really vapid and insubstantial, especially considering that, since only 1 or 2 battles are guaranteed to come up in your first run, those are the only ones you can really tie into the main story. And even then, it's only loosely connected. As for the space thing, since this comes up briefly in between tournaments, there were several times I forgot it was even a thing, and I played Red Sun before, so I'm familiar with the plot. And the stuff with Shade Man, while it does set up a new mechanic, pretty much always just ends with an unwinnable boss fight that you have to wait out for the next cutscene. Add into that how many typos and the wrong character saying the wrong line there are, along with its pretty dumb and kinda pessimistic overall message, and the writing here isn't just bad for Battle Network, isn't just bad for Mega Man, but it's downright terrible by any metric. It's the sort of writing that will actively make you stupider. Stupider? More stupid? Dumberer? See, it's already got its hooks in me. There's been a few changes this time around. For chips, you can have only up to 4 of the same regardless of code, as opposed to the previous 5. While this might not seem like much, if you're the type to go for program advances, this is gonna hurt significantly. Navicus is also back, and you can have only up to 4 different color programs at once installed before you get a glitch. I feel like this was a thing last game too, but they explicitly stated here, so I'm mentioning it. Sometimes in random battles, green mystery data will show up. It gets destroyed with a single hit, but if you manage to clear the fight with it staying intact, you get special bonuses, like extra cash, chips with special codes, or bug frags, so it's generally worth going out of your way to save them. The most notable addition, though, is the Double Soul, which takes the place of style changes. Each chip has an element or attribute. Defeat the Navi that matches it in the story, and your soul will commune with them, from then on allowing you to sacrifice the same type of chip to use their Double Soul. This gives Mega Man a form that looks like he fused with said Navi, and gives them several of their abilities, from their Charge Shot, to being able to power up chips of a similar element, to miscellaneous things like Guts Soul turning your normal shot into a rapid fire one with some iframes. There are 12 total: Guts, Fire, Roll, Search, Thunder, and Win in Red Sun, and Aqua, Junk, Metal, Number, Proto, and Wood in Blue, though if you link the games up, you can finagle both. While I'd like to talk about each, there's just too many of them for this video, plus you need to complete at least 3 playthroughs of each to get them all, so that'll be its own thing when I manage to accomplish that. And hey, I'll even rank them if you want. Anyway, you have 3 turns to use one, and you can't activate the same Double Soul more than once per battle, but if you get one you like, you can just refuse to go to the custom screen and hold on to it instead. I'd say these are the highlights of the game, and there's a lot of ways you can customize your folder to make use of them. be it centering one around a particular soul, varying up with a little bit of everything, or just making sure you have one of every type of chip so you always have something available to transform into. They also added in an emotion window, based on how you're doing in battle. Normal is normal, nothing too crazy there. If you manage to counter an enemy, hitting them right before they attack, they'll be momentarily stunned and you'll enter full synchro, which will double the damage of your next attack. Getting hit will interrupt this though. Get countered yourself and enter a rage state, where you won't get flinched and your next attack also does double. And find yourself on the receiving end of a one-sided beatdown and Mega Man will become anxious. He'll no longer be able to activate a double soul and dark chips will start showing up in the chip selection screen. You gain access to these partway through the story and each is as strong as a program advance, sometimes even slightly more so. Like the dark sword that functions just like a life sword but with an added 100 damage. Using one will permanently decrease Mega Man's max HP by 1 though, so you're probably better off avoiding it. Oh, and landing a successful hit should get rid of the anxious state. Now, when it comes to the tournaments, there are 3 and each have 3 rounds. One will be against the generic Navi, another against the custom one, and there will also be a version exclusive boss that you get a double soul for. This ties into the new game plus the title has going on. First time through, you get basic viruses, first stage chip drops, and 3 double souls. You clear the game, and it gives you the option to reload your save and start over on a harder difficulty, retaining your chips, power-ups, and money, and this time you get stronger enemies, level 2 chips, and 2 more double souls, with blue and purple mystery data being refreshed with a different set of drops. I'm currently working on this run in Red Sun. Beat that and get to the highest difficulty, which has the strongest set of enemies, the strongest chips, and the final double soul. From what I can tell, most chip drops from viruses can only be obtained during a specific run. There's a few I missed, which means I'll either have to trade or drop the difficulty down again at some point, which I'm not entirely sure that I'm able to do, so that's kinda troubling. Or maybe I can just huck my dupes at the chip trader and pray the gods favor me. Oh, and most people say that this replaces the post-game, but that's only mostly right. From what I understand, once you get the full 6 double souls for your version, you can unlock an extra area that is only 1 screen big and fight a single extra boss. So while it ain't much, it technically ain't nothing. You get 4 real-world locations for the first 2/3 of the game. AC/DC's gotten a bit of a remix, most of the houses and other structures being shuffled around, but just about everything still being there. Electown's a series of shops and a plaza with a massive speaker system. It all runs parallel to a busy street, with cars you can keep pace with if you run. I kinda like lining myself up with a car and running alongside it. We make our own fun. The Den Dome is where the first tournament takes place. It has a plaza out front, complete with hot dog stand, a lobby which really only has some bouquets, as well as a locker room and then the main venue itself. And finally there's Castillo Land. It's a theme park, which has a nice little fountain and ticket booth outside, and when you go in, there's a ton of attractions that you can really only click on. I get them not wanting to program in a bunch of rides that you're barely going to be interacting with, but when there's a cutscene that goes on for a few minutes that's just a bunch of text giving you a vague description of what's happening and how much fun you're having, it feels a little lame. Just some still images would have made the park feel a bit more real. Okay, so the no interaction thing isn't totally true, just mostly. There's a haunted house that's a part of the whole Boktai and Solar Boy Django crossover. It's seeming to be a simplified retelling of that game's events, though having never played it, I'm not sure how accurate it is. Bet getting a copy of that now would be really expensive, huh? Anyway, it's neat, though all you're really doing is walking through it. There's also a castle you can enter for the second tournament, which has a lobby and a stage where the battles take place. Then for the final third of the game, the world opens up and you can travel to different countries. While the map's a little crudely drawn, you should be able to get the basic idea of which country each is supposed to be. Natopia is in North America. It has a touristy street with a hotel, statue, and cafe, and a coliseum where the final tournament takes place, with an area in between with more stonework to check out. Sharo is Russia, and it's mostly just houses covered in snow, but also has some antennae and a space center. Yumland seems to be India, and it has an area with a bunch of food stands, then another screen with a bunch of Buddha statues. Nephrica is Africa, go figure. And it has weird pyramid teepees with faces and some idol sculptures. And finally there's Naxa. Yes, with an X, which is pretty much just a bigger version of the Space Center in Charo. There's a lot more areas this time, yet there seems to be even less to do in all of them. There are a few appliances to jack into, they seem to be there mostly just to run around in, and the later areas especially, them just being one or two screens, are smaller than past locales. The world definitely feels bigger this time around, but with so few things to play with, it also feels like kind of a waste. While I pointed out last time that there were less dungeons, since they gave you plenty of things to do outside of them, it wasn't really a complaint. Here though, it absolutely is, you getting just 3 dungeons to play around in. The first has you chasing down bats using sonar. They're invisible until you turn it on, and it only lasts 10 seconds before you need to reset it, which can get really annoying if you don't get lucky and just run into them. Yet with the stage only being 2 screens, it's still over way too quick. Then there's a theme park level, where you ride a raft to the end, with your path being blocked by walls where a story with missing words is written. You need to fill in the blanks correctly, and this is either really neat or super frustrating depending on whether you read the park's mascots' descriptions in the human world. Do that and have a bit of fun reading the silly little stories and testing your memory. Skip clicking on the right signs beforehand though, and it'll feel like the game is screwing with you. I unfortunately did the latter this round and was getting ticked off when Wizard Dog's rival wasn't Wizard Cat, but Wizard Monkey, after reading that they fought like cats and dogs. You serious? When I played the alternate version, I checked out the park a bit more closely and found out that the game wasn't just making things up as it went along. The last area has you running around a maze with one-way panels, you needing to be running over blocks that look like stylized sides of a die in numerical order to open the way forward. I kinda like this one. It can be pretty fun, except for the extra gimmick, a black hole opening up in the sky and you needing to button mash to get out. There's no instructions for this, you kind of rise regardless of how hard you mash and either get sucked up or not, so there's no good visual cue for whether you're doing it right. And when I played this as a teen, I thought the level was nigh impossible, me continually getting plopped back to the start of a stage. You remove this one aspect or at least make it more intelligible, and I'd say it's a keeper. The rest of the time, you're running around the main net. These have big, fat paths for the main entrances and exits, some thinner, winding side paths that sometimes can also be the main paths, and a few warps, so it's taking some cues from 3 and making them more obvious. The areas all look pretty much the same, just different color palettes and background images. Most of the missions have you running around these areas, sometimes doing minigames, sometimes reading dialogue, but for the most part just going back and forth until you've triggered enough scenes to get to the climactic fight. At least the undernet looks good, when you get to endgame. Don't know why they do this, but the place looks like you're walking on a giant metal serpent, making me feel like I'm on a more sinister version of Snake Way from Dragon Ball. The paths are all twisted up and it's easy to get lost at first, but it doesn't take too long to memorize them, and I'm pretty sure a few sections are actually based on past games. I swear, Undernet 6 looks like where I fought Magnet Man's ghost. While there are a few areas that I genuinely enjoy exploring, the majority of it just kinda blends together. Most viruses have 6 versions this time, complete with recolors. Seems about half new and half old, and probably as a result of you running through the same areas again and again, I think this is actually the smallest roster we have. Though, hey, if you count color swaps as different characters, you could probably get away with saying that this one is actually the largest. As for the new ones added in, they have really great designs and really annoying mechanics. A match made in hell. You have fun little musical notes that bounce all over the place. Rad spiders that invade your side of the field to be constantly underfoot. Jovial walruses that shoot out slow-moving tusks that block incoming attacks. And adorable sheep that you need to shoot off their wool to damage, and they regrow it quickly, so your charge shots are pretty much meaningless. While there are counters for many of them, I'm not a fan of upending my chip folder to deal with a single Navi, let alone trash mobs. So many of them have extra added steps for dealing with them, and seem largely designed to waste your time. Yet the bosses somehow manage to be worse. With how the game's formatted, there's still a few I haven't fought, but I have gone up against the vast majority. Top Man throws out a bunch of projectiles that you have to read the trajectories of immediately. Sparkman moves around a lot and seems to spend more time off the battlefield than on it, and Roll is also extremely dodgy. Burner Man has welding torches that you need to constantly look out for, and Video Man has strings of tape to block your shots that you need to be incessantly taking out to make sure you don't waste any good attacks on. Coldman's continually pausing the battle to summon ice blocks, and while Thunderman has only one cloud this time, it shoots off a ball of electricity that stuns you every time it passes and can rack up quite the combo. And even when Shademan stops it with the unwinnable battle thing, he'll still refuse to take damage from a lot of your attacks. Kendoman's cool though, and no one better be saying anything bad about Aquaman, but I think those are the only two I like here. They do something kind of neat by putting generic Navis into the game to fight, rather than just having them throw viruses your way. They have basic chips they can use, with heal Navis also summoning viruses, which ain't too bad, and the regular Navis summoning objects, like wind boxes and fanfares, though with how often they do so, it can feel pointless to destroy these no matter how much they get in the way. There's also a few bosses that use your chip folder and Navicast against you, which seemed cool at first, but once I got hit with a Life Sword program advanced twice in one match when I only had the ability to use it at most once, the novelty wore off. It winds up feeling like punishment for good prep, and kind of unbalanced with how the enemy can just kind of use things, rather than biding their time and waiting for their chance. And then there's the final boss, which can screw right off. Duo can throw out a ton of attacks, covering most of your area in hostile hitboxes, while his own is very specific, it being one space that is only vulnerable when he stays in place, and given how much of his timing can vary, it's pretty easy to whiff a shot, plus, ground-based attacks don't hurt him, so you need to build a folder that works on both him and the boss immediately beforehand. I swear, it feels like they forgot everything about balancing in this game, and feels even more unpolished than the first. It almost seems like they were trying to make things more frustrating on purpose. The music might be the weakest in the series. I originally thought I hated it, but as I got used to things, I eventually got to the point where I think it's fine, just nothing special. There's something really odd about it, almost like it's being played through some weird filter, and most of them also feel a bit shorter than the norm. I really like the main theme and its variations, including the tournament battle track. There's something a little wicked about what plays when you're in the Undernet, and the Save Our Planet song that's used in the final area is also pretty neat. The rest of them are fine but forgettable. I can certainly listen to the OST, and I could probably talk about a few of the tracks, but it's really not a must listen to, so if I did, it would just wind up feeling like fluff. There's been a shakeup with the sprites, most if not all of them being redone. It's the most noticeable in the overworld and with the headshots of characters used during dialogue. Mega Man looks smaller running around the net, and everything just kinda seems cuter and rounder, almost like there's a filter over... Holy crap! I never turned the filter off when I started the second collection. I think this kinda proves my point though. Previously, there was a more serious feel to how the pixels were arranged, whereas here, they give off a softer feel, so the filter that smooths things out feels a lot more natural paired with things here. I really wish I could put my finger on exactly what it is, but somehow, the first three games have an aesthetic that looks like it's trying to appeal to the early teen demographic, whereas 4 looks like it's shooting younger. While I wouldn't say one's better than the other, I definitely prefer the previous style. Are they maybe just a little less detailed? Perhaps they used lighter colors? Could one of those be it? I hesitate to call the game hard. I mean, there are definitely some bosses that stack the deck way in their favor. Guys like Burner Man and Video Man come to mind, not to mention Duo, but really, the game feels more like a challenge to your patience than skill. Against the bullcrap bosses, can you bide your time long enough to pull off a perfect counter? Against the viruses that take extra steps to actually damage, can you balance opening them up with saving your better chips for that chance, as opposed to just going in guns blazing? It certainly doesn't help that, with them gating off the better chips for later runs, it feels like you're trying to whittle everything down with a butter knife. It took me longer to clear some of the simpler tournament matches this one than some of the trickier bosses in previous titles, making me question my skill level, and if you happen to unleash a Navi's strongest version as a ghost, you can even wind up with a random encounter where you just can't do enough damage to take them down. While I know it's not my fault, it's certainly not a confidence booster. Oh, and I guess you could also look at the piddly damage output as being a way to tempt you to use dark chips, which will screw you over in the long run. So good job getting kids to pick up a debilitating habit for short-term gains, though maybe the lesson here will prevent them from doing something similar in real life. Further testing the whole patience thing is what some of these so-called tasks in this game entail. A lot of them involve just running back and forth on the net, sometimes with a destination in mind, other times you just need to track down a specific character. I actually have a player's guide from way back when that I was only glancing at when I'd get stuck. Then at one point, I needed to find Aquaman to get him to stop crying because he had flooded the net. Everywhere I went was underwater, so I couldn't use that as a clue, and with my oxygen ticking down as I ran around because I guess net navies breathe, I got tired of the aimless meandering and from then on never stopped having good old Brady games open to the exact page I was on for the rest of the game. And it didn't stop there. Before I could start one match, I needed to find 3 videotapes scattered through different areas with reversed controls, with only trap panels appearing when I reached the right area, cluing me in that I was where I needed to be. For another, I needed to run around Charo and beat a bunch of viruses holding some antenna hostage, then light a torch using a chip that I may or may not have had in my collection, all the while land's temperature ticked down in the real world, even during cutscenes. Good thing I'm a quick reader. And I think if I took too long, the process would also reset itself. Probably the worst sequence in the game was the preliminary for the second tournament, where I needed to obtain 50 points. How do you get points, you ask? Well, the first you get free, and the rest you just need to find. You can get a few by talking or fighting some NPCs in random net areas, but the majority you get one at a time, by clicking on stuff in the real world. While there are more than 50 points available, it doesn't seem like there's as much wiggle room as you'd expect. Every time I did this, because I did it thrice, I got it on the dot. Thank goodness for my frickin' guide. All of this makes Battle Network 4 feel more like Fetch Quest, the game, rather than a proper title. None of it feels substantial and like some busy work that someone made up on the spot to keep players, well, busy. This is one of the most reviled Mega Man titles, and one of the common reasons I hear is because the typically stellar post-game's been replaced with New Game Plus, but I think that's only partially it. Sure, I'm all for an extra area with new puzzles and bosses and building up my chip folder to pull off some crazy stuff, same as anyone else, but I think if any other entry in the series offered a New Game Plus, I'd be open to it. While them hoarding the good stuff for later runs certainly sours the proposition, when I like a game, I'll take any excuse to keep on playing it, be it post or plus, but with 4, while it has a lot of content rolled in, very little of it is interesting or fun. The writing is crap, the missions boring and repetitive, the music mediocre, the boss is annoying, and the areas plain and samey. Does that sound like the sort of game you'd want to play once, let alone 3 or 6 or maybe even more times? The worst part is, this game should be amazing. It has an all-star cast of returning favorites, as well as several robot masters that had been neglected finally given a NetNavi version. For perhaps the biggest boss roster ever for one of these games. Heck, even a final opponent based off a classic character reprising their role, so many different missions to play with, and even something as cool as Double Soul as a hook, yet despite trying to stuff both versions with as much content as they could, and trying to differentiate things from the previous titles, they forgot to keep what made them beloved, and by creating so many different scenarios without fleshing any of them out, makes the game feel smaller than the rest as a result. I think I understand what they were trying to do here, but that doesn't make it any less of a spectacular failure. Battle Network 4 has the special distinction of not only being the only title in the series I wouldn't recommend, but also the only one I'd actively suggest you skip. The whole game isn't fun to play, it taking almost a full playthrough to gain anything close to momentum. It takes 10 or 12 hours to finish with a guide, showing just how much they're counting on aimless wandering around to pad things out, and the story is inconsequential. About the only thing important that carries over is the main villain and their group, Nebula, which gets summarized pretty quickly and efficiently early into the next game, so you don't need to worry about missing anything. And if you want some duo in your life, the anime features them pretty substantially from what I understand. Need to get around to watching Stream in the near future. My point is, this adds little more than frustration to the Battle Network experience and can actively kill your enthusiasm for the series. As popular as 6 is, I don't think it got nearly as much attention as it should have due to how many people lost interest due to 4 and to a lesser extent 5, but we'll talk about that one soon enough. So take my advice. If you load up the second Legacy Collection and see the logo for Red Sun, just press right and pretend they forgot that there was a number between 3 and 5. On that incredibly negative note, thanks for watching. Maybe consider subscribing if you're into Mega Man content, and now let's pretend this one never happened. Oh crap. I have more videos planned on 4, don't I? For everlasting peace.